Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome back for another positive talk. Hopefully, you all have been having a good year so far. We're halfway through, just wrapped up Pride Month. So, I figured we'd jump on and do another positive talk episode. Super excited to mental health and all of that fun stuff, which I think is going to be an important topic as we get closer to election day, as well as everything else that's going on in today's world. I think that it's really important to talk about these topics. So, super excited to be diving in. Hello,
Hi Ben.
how are
How are
you?
you? I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right.
Good.
I had a long game night the other night, and
Good.
I was bent over a coffee table for a while, so I've got a little bit of a stiff back. I guess that's part of aging. But we're
That's
gonna get
what
through
was the game?
it. We played lots of games.
Okay.
It was at a friend's house, and they have a very low coffee table, and I was like
hmm
hunched over the whole time. We started with Azul. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it.
Mm-mm.
Um, and then we ended with like some survival, like, I guess, fact game. It was from the 90s, so some of the information was a little bit off, but we had a couple good laughs about like how to survive a mountain lion, all of those other things.
Sounds like a great night. Okay.
A lot
All
of
right.
fun.
Yeah.
Um,
Ben, tell me if you can hear me. I'm sitting right next to my AC unit.
yeah,
Is it okay?
yeah,
Yeah,
you're
it's
perfectly
cool.
fine. Yep.
Great. Great.
Also, well, I will let you introduce yourself so people know who you
Oh,
are,
sure.
and then we can kind of dive into a
Sure,
conversation.
sure. I'm Brian Spitolnik. Hi. I'm a therapist. I'm a licensed mental. What is my title? I'm a licensed. Oh, I've been in therapy all day. My brain is just completely scrambled. What is LMSW? I'm an LMSW. Oh my
I,
God.
I love that.
And yeah, I've been in practice for a while in private practice. I see majority of my clients are gay men and artists. I have a not-for-profit organization that I founded with a coworker called Artists Reimagining Therapy and Systems, and we see artists for free, group and individual work. And in my past life, I was a Broadway dancer for a very long time.
I love that.
That's me. Yeah.
I love that. So, when it came to diving into becoming a therapist, what do you think really called you to that?
Oh man. There's the long answer and then the short answer, and neither of them are short. So the short, long answer is that I really saw for many, many years. I was dancing in Chicago, the musical on Broadway, and it was kind of like the show that never dies. And so I saw a lot of people come through that show, and there was a mental health crisis, in my theater and on Broadway and among artists. And so it's kind of like it just kind of I saw it the way it rippled out. And as a dancer, you always know you have to change your career at some point. You can't dance forever. And so I wanted to get ahead of that. So I was, the whole time I was in that show, I was looking to see what else I would do with my life. And the career kind of came to me because the need was felt so urgent. The need for mental health care in our community felt so urgent that I thought, okay, this is something that I not only can do but need to do. And that's how it happened.
Yeah, I love that. I've actually had several people from like Broadway and other forms of being an actor and
Mm,
dancer on for Positive Talks, and we talked about the mental stamina that's required to exist in that realm. Because
yeah.
I feel like from the outside, we look and we are like, wow, you got this big role, you've made it. And it's just a lot more work than that, and a lot more getting yourself up and continuing to hear yeses and nos, doors closing in your face,
Yeah.
and then just the inconsistency, because it's not like the 9 to 5 jobs where you've got something as long as you stay within strict guidelines. It's like a forever audition that
Yeah.
people have
Yeah,
to
it's forever.
navigate
It's
through.
forever. In my case, we weren't those of us who were in the show for, that those long stretches of time. We had these kind of golden handcuffs because it's this incredible opportunity to have a steady gig. You know, most people never get that. And we did. You know, people who are in Wicked have that, and Lion King and Phantom before it closed. These long running shows, they're different beasts. And so you're there and have a steady a consistency that you never thought was going to be possible. And then there's the flip side of that. What happens when you have that consistency and your artistry and kind of the thing that made you who you are, the thing that drove you, is kind of contained in a really um, pretty strict way. It's contained because you're not going out and exploring. You're not going out and growing in the same way. So, I mean, I think no matter where you land, how you know, what happens in your life, whether you have huge success or just nominal or occasional success, it's bumpy. It's going to be bumpy for sure.
Yeah. So when it comes to the health and the mental mindset that people have to kind of navigate those waters, what do you feel like would be great advice for people going into that? Because it's a forever cycle. Like we've always got new people coming in
Yeah.
and going into it as a first timer. So, what do you think people who are going into it as a first timer need to be aware of?
Oh, they need to first and foremost, the work is to get to know themselves. Actually get to know themselves and figure out what's driving them. Figure out who is in the driver's seat when they're going in for auditions, who is in the driver's seat where they're, you know, needing to be in front of an audience, needing to have that, you know, that very real validation of performing or whatever their art is. You know, asking the question of like, which parts of me are actually making these decisions? Is it me, or is it all these things that I've kind of piled on over the years? That's first and foremost the thing to do, and that's not like overnight work. That's long term work.
Yeah. I think that when the pandemic hit, that was a space that was dramatically hit
Hmm.
by not being able to work
Yeah.
in the way that people were used
Yeah.
to. When it came to a lot of the people in that field of work ended up aligning themselves in other spaces while they waited for the pandemic to figure out what it was going to do. And a lot of people kind of figured out who they were in that time and kind of gained some type of self respect in a way that they didn't have it going in.
Mm.
And a lot of people returned with a newfound like identity of I deserve to be treated fairly. I deserve to be in a space that respects my mental health. How do you feel like that has impacted like the theater and everywhere where people are performing?
Oh, it's such a good question. Because yeah, so I was still dancing when the pandemic hit, and so I kind of fled the city, and I actually had a very good year and a half, you know, of even though it was really frightening, I really didn't know if I was ever going to dance again. You know, um, I had started applying to social work schools before the pandemic. So I was already kind of planning my exit. And so I thought, okay, well, I might just never dance again. And so that was incredibly challenging. You know, like, who am I without this, basically? Um, and then when we came back, and the reason I had such a good time was because it was the first time in however many years at that point, 13 years at that point, where I had weekends, you know, to go out with friends. I mean, you know, we were in a pandemic, so but at a certain point, weekends to go out with friends and evenings and you know a kind of like normal schedule. I was on everybody else's schedule. It felt incredibly liberating. So there was that aspect of it, and then the kind of social justice aspect that flourished during that time really impacted Broadway in a major way. You know, everybody started really reevaluating how we show up in our workspaces and how we communicate, and from you know from the top down, what it really looks like, and that included you know how do we take care of ourselves, how do we take care of each other, emotionally, you know, physically, and what we found was we had a lot of expectations, and in a lot of ways, we went back to business as usual. I mean, it really was that first year back from the pandemic was pretty tough. It was pretty tough because we had such big expectations. We had been away for so long, and so many people were holding on to so much pain, you know, pain of the fear that they had just experienced for that year and a half of having nothing. That we were kind of shot out of a cannon, and for a while it felt like, yes, we're doing this and we're back and it's amazing. And it really was expansive, beautiful. And then the reality of doing 8 shows a week kind of came crashing down on us. And it was hard. It was a really hard time. I left the show in 2022. Is that right? I left the show in 2022. And then I was able to go back just in April. So I had a year and a half off. Um, and it did feel different this time. I don't know if because I was only there for a week instead of 15 years, but I was there for that week, and it did feel like there was a new kind of care being given among the performers, between the performers and the management. And that was fantastic. That was fantastic to see.
Yeah, I know that a lot of people spoke about the fear of speaking up for themselves because
Yeah,
in a space where there are so many people that want that
we're,
job,
we're so
and it's
replaceable.
like
Yeah,
it's like
yeah,
there's so many people who see the things going on and know that there could be a better experience, but the fear of speaking up for yourself in that space had kept a lot of people silent
yeah.
and just
We were really conditioned, you know, the way that I was trained and the way that many of us were trained was to be really good soldiers, you know, like do what you're told and don't ask questions. I mean, that's just, I mean, especially for dancers. A little different for people who are just like actors or even singers. Singers more so than actors, but for dancers, like you really just shut up and do it. You know, it hurts, do it. It's scary, do it. And if not somebody younger and prettier and more talented who can do more turns and kick higher, they're very literally right behind you. So it's always been scary to speak up. And so I'm hopeful that the generation of people coming into Broadway now have a different perspective on that. I say they because I mean that generation is so removed from me. I work with them, you know, as a therapist, but I've never worked with them as a dancer myself. And so it's this whole generation of people who part of their identity is being able to say no and just being totally fine with that. Whereas no was never an option for us. Never felt like an option.
yeah. I mean, we're coming into a time where there's a lot of really big movements, and people now have social platforms to be able to speak their
Right.
minds. And
Right.
I mean, even being someone at my size of an influencer online, there's the pressure of
Mm.
needing to have an opinion, knowing where to guide people, and having something to say about anything that's happening in the
Mm.
world,
How do you
which I
deal with that?
think,
What do you do? What happens, Ben?
for me, I feel like my method or my way of seeing the world is I am a coach. I am here to help people connect to their passions and
Mm.
live a more authentic, fulfilled life. And my belief is that if more people were doing that, if more people were connected to themselves, there would be less hate in general,
Yeah,
mainly because I found on my own personal journey when I was in pain or experiencing fear, those were the times when my most judgmental or critical statements came out of my own mouth.
of course.
Whereas when I started living in my authentic identity, when I loved myself fully, I wanted everyone else around me to experience that as well. So when I heard hateful comments coming my way, I no longer looked at it as this person is hating me.
Hmm.
I looked at it as more along the lines of this person is in a lot of pain. They're not aligned with themselves, and that frustration and anger that they're dealing with is coming out and hitting anyone
Yeah.
standing close to them.
Yeah. Well, it becomes really difficult to take things personally when you know, this thing that you're talking about of kind of connecting to yourself. It's just what I was just talking about. You know, what the advice would be for any performer going into the field is really connect to yourself. You know, again, who is in the driver's seat. And when you're able to connect to yourself, this lovely byproduct of you can't help but connect to other people's selves, you know, to who they are, even if they're not willing to connect in return, even if it's not reciprocal. You can't help but see them as who they really are. because you have compassion for yourself. It's so much of it, you know, so much of understanding where you're at and like what's going on with you is having compassion for all these different versions of you that come forward, including the part that you feel like is really you. And so when you have that compassion for yourself, and it's not, you know, it's not kind of it's not too esoteric, it's not too new age. It's kind of like what where psychology is moving, where neuroscience is moving, is really showing that like, you know, the mind is a wild place and there's a lot going on in there, but there is kind of something that happens in your brain. You know, the mind, if you think of it as something that like is the part that dreams and is the part that has like the subconscious, the brain, it's going to show something different when you're connecting to your authentic self. And so when you're connecting to yourself, you can connect to other people's selves. And like, if we all did that, imagine what a beautiful world it would be.
Yeah. I mean, we live in a world now where we are bombarded with opinions and views and knowledge that before were a lot harder to access. Like, I can
Mhm.
be judged by someone on the other side of the world now and have opinions thrown where people do not have the knowledge or understanding of your circumstances. I know
Mhm.
that for me, when I started growing and connecting with people globally, that was one of the things that really expanded my mind was everyone's growing up with different traditions, different beliefs, different understandings of the world around them based upon their geographical positioning.
Mhm.
Um, and it really put me in a position where I was just like, I have to come into every conversation with the most open mind that I can and be aware that even then I will come off ignorant. And hopefully, I grant people the same as they will grant me the space to be wrong and not
Mhm.
be canceled, if you want to use the social media term for
Yeah.
someone making a mistake and being punished for it.
Right.
But it's definitely interesting to be navigating now in a world where we are so extremely connected, but also disconnected from one another.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. You know, I only recently started, you know, posting on here about the different issues that I was seeing with my clients and in the world, particularly with gay men. Um, and it's been really the reason I started doing it was because so many of my clients were coming in, and the theme so often was, I'm the only gay man who X, Y, and Z. Nobody else feels this way. And, you know, so much of that is shame. It's, you know, shame about who we are, shame about what it means to be different, you know, in this particular way. And so I really felt like, okay, there's so much commonality here. Let's see if we can, you know, string it together. But the things that I'm talking about are they really light people up in a sometimes in a really not great way. You know, and they have things to say about it. And what I've noticed is usually I just don't engage. I kind of have I like that I don't have to, you know, because I kind of have the therapeutic neutrality. I can kind of see it behind that, you know. But when I have engaged, the few times that I have, um, and it's not in my nature to like clap back or like, you know, I don't have that in me, but I'll really consider what they're saying. And if it's a miscommunication, like if they've really misunderstood whatever it is I've said, I will clarify. Um, and most of the time when I've done that kind of clarified in their comment, you know, whatever it was, they'll write to me privately and say, I'm really sorry I said that. I was having a really hard time last week and you know, I was feeling really low and I'm sorry I said that. And it's really interesting what happens, you know, that would probably never happen in person. That kind of, because there's that space from it. So there's the space to say, here's what I think you thought I said, but here's what I actually said. And for that person to then read it and then come to me separately, that's another thing that would be life changing if everyone did that. Here's what I heard you say. Um, is that what you meant? You know, and for you to be able to say, no, that's not what I meant. Here's what I meant. That would be completely changing. It would be completely, you know, the world would be a beautiful, well, even more of a beautiful place.
Yeah. I mean I've had several private messages where I've had conversations with people mainly because I feel like when you do it in public spaces online, it's almost like people have to put on a show. And a lot
Uh,
of times,
yeah.
admitting to having a wrong view or stating
Hmm.
something that may be more harsh, people feel the need to defend themselves.
Yeah,
Whereas when you
for
take
sure.
it to a private message, a lot of times the conversations remain a lot more civil because it's just you and that person trying to understand one another.
Yeah.
I've found that most people that I'm at least connected with, that we have a mutual respect for each other, that we can solve our problems in a private conversation without having
Mm,
too much of an explosion that becomes damaging to our
yeah.
friendship.
Oh, for sure. And part of that is, something that comes up all the time with clients is, fighting over texts or fighting over DMs. Um, don't ever. I mean, don't ever do it. I mean, if you know the person, even a phone call, FaceTime is better. In person is even better than that. But the way that people write these novellas to each other on text, I think is pretty wild and not solid communication. There is something to kind of writing out your thoughts. There is something to like getting clear on what you want to say and letting that stand, letting sending that. But that's not the same as like having this back and forth where you're kind of trying to read each other's tone and misinterpreting each other's intentions. So yeah, I'm an
It's
advocate for talking it out in person.
Yeah, I've recently experienced what it's like to have disagreements with people who are mutually as like healed or on their healing journey as you are.
Mm,
There's a lot less defense and a lot more understanding in the conversation.
sure.
And I've had to slowly learn to like let my walls down when it comes to speaking with other individuals who can have those types of
Yeah.
conversations where you can point out something they did that like caused you to feel something icky and them not get defensive or angry for being called out. It's more
Yeah.
of a, wow, I'm sorry that that made you feel that way. Like, that's not what I meant. It's kind of like
Mhm.
what you were saying earlier.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's been very interesting as I've navigated that because now I've got a community of coaches that I opened the community, I started it, and I have a specific vibe or core values that I want that community to hold. And
Mm,
when I feel those values are being like thrown in the mud or disrespected or not looked at all,
mhm.
reaching out to different people in the community, I found that most of them are very respectful. Whereas in other scenarios where there are people who are still dealing with a lot of pain, when they have someone point out something that they did, they take it
Mhm.
more as an attack.
Right.
And it's a very
Right.
different experience. And it's interesting to kind of navigate those types of conversations.
It is. So as a coach, what kind of work do you seek, and what kind of people seek you?
So I've personally, here lately, I've been working with coaches to kind of launch their own coaching business.
Oh, cool.
Um, I put it as I work with people in passion projects
Hmm.
because I'm extremely passionate about connecting to people and their passions. I mean, even when I reached out to you to be a part of this, I was like, I want it to be on a topic that you are interested in talking
Mm,
about because I think that when you talk to people in a space of their passion, that's where like the magic comes out.
right.
So
Right.
I
Yeah.
enjoy
So are we
working in
doing
that
it? Is it
field.
happening? Are we passionate right now?
I think
Are we
so.
in it? Okay, good. Good. What are we talking about? We're talking about mental health. Yeah, I am passionate about it. Yeah, it's really true.
Yeah, I just really enjoy helping people pick their passions back up off the shelf because I think life kind of makes us sit it down sometimes and we start to kind of build self-limiting beliefs of we're not allowed to pick that back up
Mm,
because maybe it doesn't make you enough money to support yourself. Maybe only 1% of people get that type of career and the likelihood of you getting it is so small that it's not worth pursuing.
mhm.
And I've just found that no matter which route you take, it's rough. you might as well pick
Right.
the route that's going to lead you to like a career or a life that you enjoy waking up to instead
Well,
of
yeah.
shrinking.
It's really tough because, there are all these studies about how human beings are 99.9% of the time terrible at predicting what will make them happy. Do you know these studies? You know what I'm talking about? There are whole books about this. And with that in mind, like, how do you build your life? If you cannot predict what's going to actually bring you satisfaction or happiness, how do you build your life? And kind of layer on top of that, the very real fact that most people, most of us, and I include myself in this a lot of times, don't know how to trust what they want. Growing up gay, um, I, I remember going to the toy store when I was like 6 years old, 8 years old. Like really, anytime you go to the toy store, what I wanted was a Barbie. Like I wanted a doll, and I knew I wasn't allowed. I wasn't supposed to want that. I really was supposed to want the GI Joe. That was what I was supposed to want, and and in that feeling led me to leave without having a toy. Like I would leave and be like, no, 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 no toy, because no choice was better than the wrong choice, and I wasn't sure what the right choice was. That stays with you. And I see different versions of that from LGBTQ people, period, all the time. And so, how do you move forward in the world? How do you know what the passion is when you don't even know? You're kind of your barometer is completely skewed toward like what you think you should do, or you're completely in reaction to that kind of initial sense of repression that you had, and so you're just kind of throwing things at the wall. So that's really interesting that that's what you look for in work, and like how do you actually get beneath what all those things that are standing in the way of people knowing what will make them happy.
Yeah.
you know, it's a
I mean,
question. I'm
yeah.
curious.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I point out is when it comes to adults, when you ask them like what makes you truly happy or like where does your passion lie, you wouldn't think that that would be a question that would stump an adult. But like
Oh
that's
yeah.
one of the hardest questions you could ask someone. And I was talking to a friend who's also a coach, and
Hmm.
I was mentioning to her that I feel like when it comes to parents, a lot of the things that we hear is I brought you into this world, so you have to respect me, you have to do this, you owe me this.
Mm.
And in all actuality, like the person being born had no choice. Like there was no choice of being born into
Mm.
this family.
Right.
And I think a lot of people who become parents need to realize it's not the child who should be thanking you for you bringing them into the world. It should be you thanking the child for allowing you to be their protector until they can do it themselves.
Hmm.
And it is a journey of the parent needing to give enough space. Like, as a parent, it is your job to create safe space for your child to explore the world and understand it and interpret it the way that they want to interpret it. But there's so much trauma in this world that we push onto our children,
Mm.
whether it's limiting beliefs of you can't become a dancer because that's really hard to be successful in. So parents like really box you in and move you away from that.
Right.
And
Right.
some will plow right through it and do it, but then they've got like this negative, almost like I'm doing it to spite you instead of I'm
Right.
doing it because it's my passion.
Right. Well,
No,
and of course it changes over time. Sorry,
yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt
No,
you.
you're
Yeah.
fine. But I think like as an adult to discover your passion, I think you have to put yourself intentionally in a group of people who do not judge you for being someone who wants to try lots of new things and attempt so many different things. I had a friend who like every time I spoke to them, they were like in a new class for something. Like they're like writing a novel this month. Oh, I'm learning karate this month.
Right.
Oh, I'm doing some type of interpretive dance class this month. And at first I was just like, wow, this person never nails something down. But then as I started communicating with them, I realized that they, like many LGBT people, lived a life for someone else for so long. And this person was finally breaking through those walls of feeling like they were going to be judged. And they just
Mm,
wanted to try as many things as possible.
right, right. I have two thoughts that are really strong about this. And one is I was just with some friends, and they have a 7-year-old kid. And and the mom said something really interesting to me. You know, the general outlook on raising, and I don't have kids. You don't have kids?
No.
So yeah, so I really have no idea about raising kids, and I probably never will. So this is just something that struck me. Kind of, you know, working with adults who inside are still children
Yeah.
very often. I mean, I think everybody in some ways can be, but what this mother said was, you know, the common view of raising a kid is that you're preparing them for life. And her view was, you know, this kid already has a life. Like she's living her life. Like like this, what is this if not her life? So treating the kid as if she's already living the life that she's going to live, because actually in reality she is a much different approach, because that kind of boxing in of what you can't do and what the world's going to teach you, it kind of falls away, because well, you can do whatever it is you want to do because you're doing it. You're 7, you know, like there are no stakes. Just do whatever you want to do. And so for this friend that you're just talking about, it reminds me of that, like of being that this 7-year-old is like so creative and so free. And it sounds like maybe your friend got back to that place of just being like, you know, because when we were all kids, like, of course we tried out everything. I also went to karate. It wasn't great, you know, like I was not going to go very far there, but I did it because like kids go to karate. The other thing that I was thinking was, you know, for a lot of this isn't just for artists. It's for it can be for anybody. Like you decide when you're 8 that you're going to be a doctor. You know, because like you have a little stethoscope and you're playing doctor. And I'm going to be a doctor, and then you do pre med, and then you go to med school, and like you're in school forever, and all of a sudden you're out of med school, and it was hell, and you're like a pediatrician, and you're like, oh my god, I hate my life. You know, love helping these kids, hate my life. You know, of course that's going to happen, because the person you were who decided to be a doctor and who took on the identity of somebody who was going to be a doctor, and whose family then kind of like organized themselves around your identity as someone who's going to go to med school and be a doctor. All of that, it no longer really reflects who you are or what you want. Um, so having the courage to continually re-examine that, and of course my own version of that is like I wanted to be a dancer from the time I was 4. um, and you know, I was always going to dance class after school. I went to undergrad for musical theater. You know, I graduated and was just like, I'm going to get a Broadway show, I'm going to get a Broadway show, and then I did. And then once I got it, it was like, oh shit, now what? What do I do now? um, and and I see that a lot with artists. I mean, especially I say especially dancers because that's, you know, who I have spent my life with. But we have to start training so young. We have to make that decision and that commitment so young that by the time you're in your 20s, you're exhausted. You know, you've done this your whole life. You have so many scars. I mean, physical scars, but also just mental, emotional scars around like kind of being beaten into submission, that you're like, what do I want? Where am I going? I know I can't do this forever, but like, what? You know, it can be a really scary thing for a lot of people.
Yeah. I mean, I've had people on my positive talks who were mothers who were conversating about not knowing what they should do choice wise for like leaving a marriage or leaving a job that's paying them well because they're afraid of how they'll be able to support their child. And I believe your choices are how your children will navigate the world as well. So if your
Oh,
child
yeah,
sees
no
you,
pressure.
if your child sees you like staying in an abusive relationship because that's what you're supposed to do, they will learn the lesson of you're allowed to take abuse. If their parents give up their dreams for something, they're being taught it's okay to give up on your dreams. Some of the most inspired children, you hear them as adults speaking of people teaching them never to give up on their dreams, to never allow someone to abuse them, to always stand up for yourself. So I think there are lessons that you can teach children that are really important for them to learn as adults, but you teach it to them in a child way. Like, I personally think, like, if your child says I want to be a cheerleader this year, you should make a commitment with them of saying, well, if you choose cheerleading, like, you're going to finish the year, like, you're going to do the full
Mm.
thing.
Mm.
And if you don't like it, you don't have to sign up next year.
Hmm.
And that teaches them, like, to try something, but it's not permanent life choices, because nothing's permanent. You can go through med school and get to the end and be like, this really isn't for me. Maybe down at the core,
Right.
you wanted to help people. And at that
Hmm.
younger age, the way that you were taught that you can help people is to be a
Hmm.
doctor. But later you realize that you want to be a coach or a dance instructor or
Hmm.
someone who teaches people art. There's
Hmm.
lots of different ways to help people,
For sure.
but when you're younger, you've got such a limited view of what that means
Hmm.
that you have to be okay with
Hmm.
saying, okay, yes, I just did like 15 years of school, but I can take this knowledge and expand it
Yeah.
somewhere else.
It's the what's the sunk cost thing? What's the sunk cost thing? It's the sunk cost paradigm or whatever it is. But it's like it's fallacy. It's a fallacy that you get through med school and you realize that, oh God, I hate being a doctor, but I already spent all this time, all this money doing it. I can't possibly do anything else. Again, I see that a lot with dancers and actors. Like, well, I've done this my whole life, and now I'm 40. I've never done anything else. It's too late. Even if like the career has not been what you wanted it to be, even if like you never really got off the ground, it's like, well, I can't stop now because why? Like really, it's all these. It's I mean they're limiting beliefs, but they're also the beliefs that you were taught really strongly, maybe as a kid, that like you have to stick with something that you started. I think I was given some kind of like in between on that when I was growing up because my parents always felt like it was important for us to keep going with whatever we did, unless we were fucking miserable, and then they were like, okay, you're miserable, like what's it worth? Like there's no reason to stay miserable. Unless it was just like plain old fear, and maybe that fear was good to get through. But if we were miserable, we were allowed to like say like, okay, I'm gonna redirect my energy. That's not how we thought of it, but like that's what happened. And I think how liberating it would be for more adults to be able to say it's a totally different thing when you have kids to keep alive. You're feeding these little people, and that's very real, and I don't minimize that in any way. But what would happen if you did allow yourself to be like, you know what, this sucks, and I'm not happy. Maybe I can redirect my energy somewhere else. You know,
Yeah.
wouldn't that
And
be
I
cool?
mean, as you become an adult and debt starts to pile up and bills are being paid, like, your choices feel like they're more limited than they are. And I think that adults that have children are feeling it a little bit more than people who just have like a mortgage debt or car debt or college debt.
Yeah.
Because a life, you can't just be like, oh, I won't pay it this month. You
Right.
have to feed your children every month.
Yeah. Right.
But like I think that when it comes to the process of like me realizing like this is not what I was meant for and jumping ship, I I had to realize that my family didn't know what was best for me. Like,
Mm.
I was
What
given
were
the
you
choice of,
doing? What was your life?
so I went to school for architecture.
Okay.
I was given the choice of architecture, doctor, or lawyer. I chose
Mm.
architecture because it was the closest I could get to being creative. But on my journey through college, I was a freshman counselor. I worked with international students, and I found that helping people brought me to life.
Mm.
And when I sat there, I was just like, well, there's not really a career that's just like you get to be a freshman counselor for life, or you,
Sure, there
unless
is.
you worked
A
for the
social
school.
worker. Yeah.
And I was like, well, what do I really want, because I looked at every career and I
Mm,
always fell into some type of position of I want to help people. And when one of my friends was just like, maybe you should try coaching. And this was like, I mean, coaching is still very new.
yeah.
Um, and I was just like, what does that even mean? Like, how does that work? Luckily, I fell into a job that pushed me into a role of coach. I was pretty much leadership development coach, and I fell in love with every aspect of it. It had nothing to do with architecture, but
Mm,
it fell so perfectly in line with everything that I enjoy doing. And there was hard parts where it was like I was being thrust into an environment that I was never a part of before, but the eagerness and willingness to learn was so powerful there, because I was just like, everything about this feels so right. And if I had stuck myself in that position of like doctor, architect, or lawyer, that's the only way to be successful, because my family was very well off, and everyone in my family that was very well off, doctor, lawyer, architect, doctor, lawyer. So I had this vision of that's what success looked like,
right,
but all three of those options left me feeling very unfulfilled and disconnected from myself.
right.
And I was like, so does success mean I have to be unhappy and be wealthy? And I was just like, no, there's examples of people being successful in whatever way. And it's just like, do you have enough drive to be successful in your passion, no
Hmm.
matter, or despite what other people around you are saying will or will not make you successful?
Right. It's really interesting because passion is not something I think about a lot when I'm working with clients, which is funny because it seems so obvious, when you're talking about it. Because instead, it's kind of so much of the work is getting uh, to a place of kind of open curiosity, which is different from passion. It's different from like that drive. Um, Getting to open curiosity about like what could be, curiosity about what you're feeling, why you're feeling it, what you're drawn to, what you're not. Having that curiosity, that's so much more of where I'm trying to get to with people. And so it's really giving me something to think about, this idea of passion, because where does that live in relationship to what we were talking about, the authentic self? If that exists, what where does passion live within it?
Yeah. I mean, for me, my passion, like, I knew there were certain skills that I had to learn, like, to make my passion a reality. So I put it to people this way, like, if you have a message that you want the world to hear, you will learn how to get that message out there. If
Mm.
you have to create a YouTube channel, we're not born with the skills to edit and create videos, but we will find it. If we need a mic to get people to hear us, we will find a mic.
Hmm.
I think that when you have a passion, there are lots of skills that are required that are not in your passion,
Hmm.
but the drive to want to get that passion across will drive you into all these other things. Like, I've been in so many different business meetings where I had
Mm.
no idea what was going on, but I knew the message that I wanted the world to hear. And I was like, it requires you sitting in front of me to be a part of this for me to get my message to the group that I want it to reach.
What's the
So
message?
we are connecting people to the passions,
Hmm.
and I
Yeah, I
realize
think
that,
your passion is passion. Is that
yeah,
is that
I
accurate? Yeah.
I think it is, because I found it within myself, and it was such a life-changing experience for me of knowing, and it makes everything else that I try to do, that's not aligned, feel so wrong.
Mm,
That I'm just like, yeah, I'm backing away from what I'm truly called to do,
mm,
because I'm scared, and I will try to find an easy way out. I've done it multiple times where I'm like, maybe I should apply for a job that's got consistent pay. Um, I got hit with, I put my like profile out on Indeed and LinkedIn, and I got an email one morning where it was like, we found a job that's perfect for you based upon your resume. And I opened up the email and it said trash collector.
No,
And that
really?
just like destroyed me for a second. I was just like, I have so many qualifications. And
I,
according,
the social worker in me wants to make sure I say, if trash collection is your passion,
yeah,
like
yes,
the woman who is the trash commissioner of New York City, trash is her passion. Now she also happens to be a Tisch, and so she's a multi like billionaire. But maybe trash is your passion. But for
yeah,
you, it sounds like
it
not.
had
It's
it
not.
had nothing to do with it. But I didn't have an Indeed profile, and I created one because I was lacking like the ability to push through a fear. And instead of spending time pushing through it and doing what I knew I needed to do, I was like, well, what if I had a backup plan? And I signed up for Indeed and got that email. And it just made me sit there and go, I need to stop like trying to find another way. Like, I know that this is what I want to be doing.
Mm,
And the universe kind of slapped that one there and was just like, yeah, it's not happening. You're not going this route. If you do
right.
want to go this route, it's trash collection for you.
Yeah.
Um,
I had a similar experience. Because in those 15 years that I was dancing, I went back to school to get a master's in writing. So while I was still dancing at night, but during the day I was going to get a master's. And I was like, this is great. This is going to be my second career. I'm going to leave dancing as soon as I make enough money as a writer. As soon as I make the same money I'm making on Broadway writing, I will leave the show. And it just never happened. It never happened. And I was injured from my show for a while, so I moved to LA for 6 months, and I started doing just what you're talking about. I like created a LinkedIn profile for the first time in my life, and like put all these qualifications that I have. Like I went to an Ivy League university, like I went to the University of Michigan. Like I thought this was really impressive stuff, and I was like, surely someone's gonna hire me. I was applying for entry level positions at like studios and production companies and like all the jobs that you apply to in LA. Nothing. Hundreds of applications, nothing, not a thing. And that was humbling in such an enormous way. Um, I mean, I did eventually kind of take it as this is not the right path. And I think somebody else in a different position might have been like, this is the right path. You just need to hone your skills. You need to like stick it out. You need to like 6 months in LA is nothing. But I really took it as like, oh no, 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 no. This is not where you're supposed to be going. And that's when I came back to New York is when I started going to social work school. But it can be really demoralizing to kind of think like, no, I'm going to do the normal thing. I'm going to do like the 9 to 5 thing. I'm going to do the responsible thing, and to have the universe say, or whoever, I mean, George, just like the head of Fox or whoever is doing the hiring, say, no, 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 it's not what you're doing.
yeah, it's definitely an experience because having had a job where I got to feel so aligned with it, which I consider that really lucky that I was getting paid so much to do something I absolutely loved.
Yeah.
And then taking the leap because my company merged with another company and dissolved our team. And they're like, we are going to put you here. And it was nothing like what I wanted to be doing. And I was like, thankfully, I was building a side hustle of my own personal one-on-one clients as a
Mm-hmm.
coach.
Mm.
I utilized my social media following to find people who wanted to work with me, and I jumped ship and started doing that. And of course, I had to learn how to be an entrepreneur. I had to learn to do taxes as a business owner. And all of that is so overwhelming when you don't have anyone like giving you that instruction. And most people, when you ask for help, they're like, $2,000, please, and I will
Right.
help you.
Right. Right.
And I was just not at that point in my life where I could just afford to give everyone I needed help from
Mm-hmm.
$2,000 or more.
Right. Right.
So it was a learning experience. And of course, there were times where I fell straight on my face. But I took another corporate job because I was like, consistency, this will work for now. And it was such a miserable experience to be in that space because I knew I wanted to help people, and I was sat in a position where I wasn't allowed to do that. And I was just like, mm, this is icky. It was a sales job where it did not align with my morals or core values at all.
Mm,
And I was just like, no, this this is definitely not it. So I
right.
was like, I need to be bold and really push for what I want. And it was a journey, but it's something that I realized I was doing a lot of things right
Mm-hmm.
that other people were telling me wasn't the way you should do things.
Mm,
But it aligned with me so well that it connected with other people. Because when
mm,
you're in your passion spot, other people who are in theirs are drawn to you and connect to you in a way
sure.
where it's just like you get to experience that connection with someone of understanding what it means to be in a realm that is meant for you.
Right.
And
How has it changed for you? Like, how long have you been in this profession, and how has it changed since you began?
so I've been doing this for almost 7 years now, come this fall.
That's amazing.
It's transitioned from social media being my main space to realizing that it's a lot more about my networking and connection ability,
Mm-hmm.
not so much online.
Mm-hmm.
And because the way that the algorithms and everything work now is very set towards you have to pay to get someone to see you now.
Right.
That's not what I came into the world with.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm grateful that the time I was able to get in front of a large audience of people, that I was able to make the connections I made. But now I've kind of been a little bit more offline, doing
Mm-hmm.
networking behind the scenes and less in front of everyone's face.
Mm.
And
What does that mean? Like conferences?
so
What does it
like
mean to network offline?
so I would say like private communications with
Oh,
people instead of
okay.
doing
Okay.
things so publicly.
Gotcha.
Because
Interesting.
before I thought it was all about being seen in public.
Mm-hmm.
And that just put me in a position where like my personal life was very, very exposed
Mm-hmm.
to the public,
Yeah.
which gave everyone permission to dig around and whatever they wanted to do. Whereas now it's a lot more of me operating behind the scenes and making all the connections and having the conversations to make things happen.
Oh, cool.
um, it feels a lot better to be in that space
Mm-hmm.
because for me, professional life is the conversations that I have all the time with people.
Right.
Even on my positive talks, I feel like these conversations are deeper than your standard conversations online.
Yeah, I
And
think
I
so.
enjoy that type of connection with people.
Totally. Really cool. Well, we have a couple minutes left because I'm then going to have to jump on to my next therapy session.
Yeah.
So tell me anything that you're wanting to ask me, anything I should be asking you. I
Yeah.
didn't prepare any questions.
I mean, I would say to wrap it up, when it came to the transition from walking out of one professional career to the next, which they don't have a lot in common, but you've kind of connected the strings
Mm,
of being a dancer, seeing the state of people's mental health there, and then
yeah.
choosing the career. Um, how would you say you felt that transition feels to you now that you're in a new realm of work?
Mm. It was different than I expected. It was bumpier than I expected in that in a lot of ways, it was really smooth. In that I was really fortunate to have a great internship that then led to a job, which is where I still am. Like so. So in that way, it was smoother than I could have expected. What I didn't expect was how much of my identity was wrapped up in being a performer. And so I don't know how I would have prepared for that differently, except that maybe I would have continued performing alongside doing this job for a little bit longer because I had that option. I could have done it. Not everybody does, but that's something I think I would have done differently because just all of a sudden going from, dancing every night to sitting and talking to people and listening and absorbing, it's two very different things. And it is interesting because a lot of performers, as a second career, go into therapy. But I found that it's a very different thing. There's a lot of, when you're performing, it's a lot of output, output, output. And when you're a therapist, it's a lot of absorbing, it's a lot of taking in. So in that way, it was bumpy. It took me a while for like my nervous system to adjust to a very different way of life. Now, 2 years out, just 2 years, it's shifted and it feels great and it feels incredibly grounding and energizing in a way that it didn't at first. So I'm really grateful for that because there was a period where I was working with these clients that I thought were fantastic human beings and I was doing everything I could to help them, but at the end of the session, I was so exhausted and so depleted. I thought, oh no, I've made a huge mistake. I can't, like, how am I going to do this with my life? And now I'm really happy to say that is no longer the case. I'm still enjoying it. I'm still fulfilled by it, and it's now kind of energizing. So,
Do you feel like there was a shift in the type of client you were working with, or do you feel like you've created new boundaries that are healthier for you to navigate that?
really good question. I don't think it's either of those two actually, because I think some of the clients that I had during my internship, I still have, um, which is really cool because it's those are the longest therapeutic relationships I have now, and it's really cool to see that growth and that progression and see how our relationship changes. But I'd say my the modalities that I use have grown because I've continued to study, which is one of the things I love about therapy. You're never done studying. You always have to, to keep your license, you have to continue studying.
Yeah.
So as I've continued to study, my toolbox has gotten stronger and more robust. So I think that has everything to do with it. Being able to kind of pull up the right tool at the right time.
I love that. Well, I
Yeah.
see that we're close to the end of the hour, so I just want to say thank you so much for coming on here and having this talk.
Thank
I
you.
really enjoyed this conversation. I really enjoyed your answers as well as the questions that you threw back at me.
Good.
Is
Good.
there
Good.
anything that you would like to promote or let people know if they're interested in contacting you before we jump off?
Yeah. Yeah. Um I want to encourage people to ask for help, and if that means reaching out to me, and asking me for help and allowing me to lead them to another resource, if I'm not the person to help them, I really want to encourage everyone to do that. Tell your friends to do that, tell your family to do that, because that is the hardest part, to reach out to somebody and say like things aren't going the way that I want them to, or like I'm in a really low spot, or just I've never been to therapy and I've been thinking that maybe it would be a good idea. Any reason to reach out is a good reason. So I think I really want to be a resource, and I really am glad to be a resource. So reach out. And then the other thing is, if you are an artist and you're watching this at any point, go on over to artsnyc.org. That's the website of my organization. We do free individual and group therapy for artists, and it's free is always in the budget. So come on over, and you don't have to be in New York to do that. Some of the work is online, and some of it is in person here in New York.
I love that.
Yeah,
I'm glad that that is a resource out there for people because knowing how low some people's wallets can go in that field, I think that being able to
yeah,
still have access to therapy is so important. It was life changing for me having a therapist instead of me using my own internal thoughts every single
yeah,
day.
yeah,
So I highly recommend anyone, um, even if you're not an artist, finding therapy to kind of navigate life because it helped me feel less crazy. It made me realize, like you were saying at the beginning, like I'm not the only person experiencing what I'm experiencing, and there are people out there that have methods, like you said, tools that can really help you navigate through things, and
yeah,
it's life changing. So totally worth
yeah.
it.
And I also will say the thing about therapy is that they found that the most throughout there's a million different models, a million different kinds of therapies, and the thing that is consistently the most useful tool that any therapist has is the relationship between the therapist and the client, or the therapist and the patient, but whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so no matter who the therapist is, what their modality is, if you're able to establish a relationship, that in and of itself is life changing. That in and of itself, will get you out of, thinking that you have to do it all yourself. So
Yeah.
go forth,
Yeah.
go to therapy. Yeah.
And if the first one doesn't work, there's always millions more to go through.
Yeah.
So don't
It is like dating. Yeah. You don't need to find your soulmate on the first time. Yeah.
yeah,
Like keep
don't
going
give
on
up
blind
on it.
dates. Yeah.
Don't give up on therapy just because the first one wasn't a match. So
Absolutely. That's such a good point. Yes.
thank you
Well,
so
Ben,
much again.
thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Be in touch. Let's talk
Yeah,
soon.
most definitely. Have a good rest of your day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.